But hey, we're going to jump in. We're continuing our summer series called Wise Guys, a look at wisdom through the Book of Proverbs. And we've said that life is a lot like solving a Rubik's Cube. That a Rubik's Cube has some steps and some challenges, and if you're anything like me, when you're solving a Rubik's Cube, you try, you fail, you try, you fail, you put it down and say someone else will take care of it. And maybe that's how you address life sometimes. And you try and fail, and then you give up and you move on to the next thing. Because life is challenging and it's difficult and it's hard, and there are some specific steps like a Rubik's Cube and skill that's needed to solve it, and the Book of Proverbs gives us some of that wisdom. Some of that insight, some instruction and direction, how to navigate the challenges that we face in life with greater success and less regret. And today, one of the challenging areas that we're looking at when it comes to our lives is our finances. And now finances aren't a super exciting topic to talk about, but God has a lot to say about it, so we've got some things to say about it as we study His Word and take a look at it. But I want to tell you a little story first, because my wife and I this month get to celebrate our 17-year anniversary. Cue the cheers. Okay, great. 17 years. It's been incredible. My wife is super wise, super smart. I am beyond blessed. I married way out of my league, like most of us men did. And but when we got married, we had some commitments that we were making. We had some things that we said in our marriage, in this life that we're going to spend together, there's some things that we want to make sure that we're intentional about. And one of those things was the commitment to be obedient and faithful in worshiping God by giving back a portion of whatever He entrusted us with. However much or however little God gave us as a family, we wanted to make sure that we were responsible and honoring to God with that. And in the church setting, we call that tithes and offerings. It's giving back a portion of what God has given to us. And it's a big deal because money is one of the greatest stressors on marriage that our world has ever known. Look at the stats. It's at least in the top 3, if not number 1. Top stressors or reasons for marriage struggles. And we knew it was going to be difficult, and so we wanted to make sure we could navigate our financial life together with some skill. And the Book of Proverbs, as it talks about wisdom, is really talking about navigating life with skills in godly living. And so we wanted to be skilled as it related to our finances, with godly living in our finances. And we knew it wouldn't be easy because the wise thing rarely is easy. And while we've never wavered in our commitment and obedience in this area to God, I can tell you it hasn't been easy, or it hasn't been without thinking, a few extra bucks would be nice. In fact, when we first got married, I was still in school, playing soccer, contributing very little to our family's income, and a few extra bucks in the bank would have been nice. Or when we bought our first house and our monthly expenses went up substantially from what we were used to. Or when we were planning to have kids. And my wife is amazing. She's so responsible and budgeting and planning. And I remember when she took a piece of paper and she started budgeting out kids. And she starts like, how much are they going to cost? Can we afford kids? And I remember her coming into the room being like, crying, we can't have kids. We can't afford kids. And I said, sure we can. People do it all the time. And I looked at her spreadsheet and I said, no, that all looks about right. I guess we can't afford kids. But the reality is we figure it out, we make it work. Even recently when we had to replace our AC and furnace, it would have been nice to to have a little extra money to be able to do that. See, throughout our marriage, we've had to ask the question, not what's the comfortable thing, not what's the easy thing to do, not what puts more money in my wallet, but what's the wise thing to do. 2 weeks ago when we started this series, we asked this question as a reminder to apply wisdom to our lives and asking what is the wise thing to do. And today we're asking this question as it relates to our finances. And especially in the church, this is a hard topic to talk about. Most people see the church as just trying to grab your money and trying to get as much as they can to do what they want to do. And can I just say, our heart, it couldn't be further from that. That couldn't be further from the truth of what our heart is at Heritage Church, the resources that you generously give. Go back into the community and into the ministry that God is doing at each one of our campuses, as well as around the world. And we have ministry partners not just locally, but around the world, advancing the ministry and the gospel of Jesus Christ because of your generosity. And so this isn't going to be some shame message of why you should give more or do more or be better at this, but I first just want to start by saying thank you. Because across all of our campuses, and I'm so proud of this campus, the generosity that is displayed here is such an encouragement, and I get to see, and I hope you see the ministry impact it is making in our community. It's what allows us to do church in the park. That's what allows us to come alongside the community in different ways and continue to try to build relationship and serve those in this community so that they can hopefully hear about the truth and the love of Jesus Christ. And so thank you for your generosity. And I don't know what your experience has been in church and when talking about money messages, but I grew up in a church where it was maybe shameful or attacking to be more generous. Here's why we're talking about it. It's not to do any of that, but here's why we're talking. We're talking about money today because God talks about money. He talks about it a lot. And it's one of the most divisive things in our culture and in our nation and maybe in your family. That money has this way of grabbing hold of our hearts and we don't want it to let go. And God talked a lot about money. In fact, money is one of the most talked about topics in all of the Bible. There are about 2,000 verses that relate to money or my possessions. Just for comparison, that's twice as many as faith and prayer combined. Right? There are twice as many verses about money and resources and wisdom with it. In fact, almost half of Jesus' parables that he told had to do with money or possessions. And out of all that Jesus talked about, everything that Jesus talked about 25% of it had to do with our stewardship. In other words, a quarter of all that Jesus talked about had to do with wisdom and how we handled the resources that we have. I think it's a pretty big deal, and yet we don't maybe talk about it enough, or we don't apply the wisdom that God has given us in his word into our lives. We sang earlier, and it hit me while we were singing, God, shake up the ground of all my traditions, break down the walls, do what you want to do. And I just thought, what would the world look like if we had hearts when it came to our finances, not to do what we wanted to do, but to do what he wanted to do with it? And that's my hope for us today, that we would catch a different glimpse and have a different perspective. And while we're not going to go through all 2,000 verses that the Bible has about money and giving, I do want to give us some wisdom principles that we see throughout the Proverbs that God gives us on how to handle our resources and our finances. And I want us to ask the question, when it comes to my stuff, when it comes to the money and the resources that I have, what's the wise thing to do? Because my hope is that we'll begin to shift our perspective to see what we have through God's word rather than through our world. But to be clear, I want to make this clear. Today is not advice from your pastor about how to spend your money. This is not my instruction or wisdom on money. We're looking at God's perspective, God's wisdom, what his word says about our resource. And if we let it, God's wisdom, it will help us navigate the financial challenges in life with greater success and fewer regrets. And so we're going to take a look at 4 actions of godly wisdom when it comes to my finances. We're going to ask the question, when it comes to my finances, what's the wise thing to do? And here's the first thing we begin to see. When it comes to my finances, what's the wise thing to do? The first action, give it generously. We see throughout Scripture, and especially in the Proverbs, this posture of generosity to give it generously. There are a lot of things that we're going to be talking about today and a lot of different Proverbs. I would encourage you to take notes or pull out your phone, and instead of playing Angry Birds, just maybe open up a note and just type out throughout our time together, we're going to be looking at Proverbs, and type those Proverbs out so later in the week you can go back and check them out for yourself. But Proverbs 22, verse 9, Proverbs 22, verse 9 says this, whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor. You say, that sounds a little weird. Yeah, that's because it's a proverb, and they often sound a little weird, and you have to read them a few times and understand what it's saying to understand that he who has an eye to see others in order to be a blessing, those are the ones who share their bread with the poor. The one who is generous, who cares for the needs of others. This is the proverb, or a proverb among many that call us to generosity. And I couldn't figure out another way to do this cleanly and logically to present for us today other than to just give you another 4 reasons that the proverb calls us to apply generosity within this first action of generosity. Okay? So subpoints under give it generously. Number 1, give it generously because generosity models God's heart. Generosity models God's heart. Proverbs 19:17 says this, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deeds. And whoever is generous to the poor, give it generously because it models God's heart. Whoever gives generously to the poor, it's as if they're giving it to God. It's as if they're offering to God what he has already given to them. Jesus talks about this in Matthew 25:40 when he's telling people how to treat one another, and he says, whatever you did for the least of these, whatever you did for the poor, whatever you did for the rejected, for the minimalized, whatever you did for the least of these, you did to me. So whenever you're generous to those who have less, it's as if you're giving to God. And one reason we give generously is it's an expression of God's heart and his character. Ephesians 1:7-9 actually tells us about God's heart and his character. It says, in Christ, we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses according to the riches of his grace. The riches of his grace. He had all the grace. Jesus has all the grace. What is this? Oh, man. Excuse me. Moving on. The riches of all his grace. He had all the grace, and he lavished it upon us. He didn't hold it back. He wasn't stingy with it. He took his grace and like a dump truck dumped it out on us by the gift of his Son, in all wisdom and insight, making known to us the mysteries of his will according to his purpose, which is set forth in Christ. This is the kind of God we have. Ephesians 1, one passage among many that tell us about the heart of God and what he's like and his character, that he is a generous God. See, in our time of greatest need, when humanity was being destroyed by sin, God sent his Son Jesus to be the full and final payment for that sin once and for all, generously lavishing his grace upon us to free us from the slavery and the death as a consequence of our sin. Throughout the Bible, we see it says that everything we have comes from God. Every good and perfect gift comes from the Father above. And when we give, especially to the needs of others, we model the generosity and the compassionate heart of the God who created us. Give it generously because generosity models God's heart. Give it generously because generosity honors God. Proverbs 3 says, honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will be bursting with wine. Honor the Lord with the wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. It's a picture of giving back to God a portion of what he's given to us, because then you will see that you have more than enough and God will increase what you have. What this proverb is doing is talking about the priority of giving. And if we wait to see what we have left, to see what we'll give back to God, we'll often find there's little to nothing left over to be generous with. It would be like taking my paycheck, and this is not my paycheck, just some scrap metal money from dropping off some scrap metal, but it's taking what I have, and I pay my mortgage and my main utilities, and I pay that bill, and I buy some groceries, and some gas, that went up, so I got to get my hair done. My kids have some sports, and don't forget my Starbucks order. Wait, but there's an opportunity to be generous, but I don't have anything. Hold on, God, I think I got, here you go. Here you go, God. You can have that. This is the picture of generosity as a priority. That it comes first, off the first fruits. That's what that means. That we give to God off of the first fruits, right off the top, not the leftovers. What would it look like if my perspective and my budget shifted to prioritizing generosity towards God and His mission before my wants and desires in life? See, God tells us that the wisdom of prioritizing generosity, it honors Him. Give it generously. Here's the next one, because generosity values what God values. Generosity values what God values. Proverbs 28 says, a greedy man stirs up strife, but the one who trusts in the Lord will be enriched. See, someone who values getting more, when that's my value, it stirs up conflict. It stirs up strife. It causes dissension. Maybe you've seen this or experienced or heard about this as it relates to the execution of a will after someone passes away. And the family begins fighting over, no, that's mine, trying to get more, and the strife that comes out of that. Or maybe it's someone that pursues legal means, suing another for financial gain. It's the greedy stirring up strife. They're not valuing what God values. He desires unity among His people, not arguing, not fighting, not legal action. Generosity values what God values. Here's the next one. Verse 27 gives us a different picture of what matters to God. Rather than what we think, here's what matters to God. It says, whoever gives to the poor will not want, but he who hides his eyes will get many curses. See, generosity values what God values by caring for the needs that God cares for and cares about. Whoever gives to the poor will not want. God will take care of you. You take care of the people that God cares about. You value what He values. He'll take care of you. But when you hide your eyes, when you know you should do something and you refuse to do it, maybe not the wisest thing. Ask yourself, what does your generosity, what does the level of your generosity, or what does the lack of your generosity show what you value? And does it match up with what God cares about and with what He values? Generosity values what God values. Here's the last one, generosity. Generosity protects my heart from corruption. Generosity protects my heart from corruption. Not only is this the fourth reason of many that Proverbs gives for being generous, but it's also the second action of applying wisdom in our finances. When it comes to my money, when it comes to the resources, what's the wise thing to do? The wise thing is to guard against greed. To give it generously, to guard against greed, because greed corrupts you. When Jesus comes back, and He is coming back, He's not going to care how big your bank account is or how fat your portfolio is. He's going to care about what you did with what you had. Did you value what He valued? Did you care for what He cared for? Did you display His heart of generosity, or did you just try to get more for yourself? Proverbs 11:24 says, one gives freely, yet grows richer. How is it that one who is generous seems to constantly get richer? Another one withholds and is stingy when he knows he should give, but he only suffers want. How does that work? Well, it's the principle of greed. See, for greed, more is never enough. Greed always wants just a little bit more. In Proverbs 10:15, I told you there's a lot of Proverbs, and you may just want to jot these down. One of the things I've done in my Bible is on all of these Proverbs, you'll see it here. I got a little money sign that when I flip through the Proverbs, I'll just put that little money sign next to a proverb that has to deal with finances, that has to deal with money, so that I can continue to find wisdom as God defines it. Proverbs 10:15 and 16 says, a rich man's wealth is his strong city. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. The wages of the righteous lead to life. The gain of the wicked lead to sin. What's that one mean? It's a little longer. It's a little more confusing. What it's saying is that money, that my resource, it's not to be despised. It's not a bad thing. A rich man's wealth is some sort of security. It's not everything, but it's something. And the poverty of the poor, man, it really makes their life hard, and it's a struggle. How you get your money, the wages of the righteous lead to life, the gain of the wicked to sin. They divide and they distract, but here's what it's saying. Money isn't good or bad. It's not right or wrong. Money is neutral. It's a tool to be used, and God calls us to use it with wisdom. And he says how you gain it and how you get it matters. It can not only bring some practical security, but it can bring some very real struggles. But here's what money does. It reveals the character of your heart, which is why we're to guard against greed. See, greed is not a financial issue. Greed is a heart issue. And Proverbs 4:23 tells us to guard our heart, for everything we do flows from it. And several years ago, our oldest daughter, she was maybe around 5 or 7 years old. Kyla was playing on a jumpy inflatable thing, and she scraped her knee. She just kind of got this like rubber kind of burn scuff mark. It didn't bleed. It was just a little scrape. We didn't think much of it. She was fine. But a couple days later, her knee was swollen, it was red, and it was warm to the touch. So we went to the doctor, and sure enough, the doctor's like, yeah, she's got a staph infection, got to get some antibiotics. And we just thought, like, how crazy is this? One little scratch, one little scuff could cause such an ordeal and be, untreated, life-threatening, I think. I'm no doctor, but... And just like one seemingly insignificant cut or scratch can attract a deadly disease, the same is true with our spiritual and life and our character. It doesn't take much for greed to penetrate our hearts and ruin our lives. When we fail to protect our heart against even the smallest act of greed, it can take over, impacting our whole life and all of our focus. I don't know about you, but personally, when I struggle to be generous, I see it as a red flag of greed creeping into my heart. When I want to just keep a little bit more for myself, see, this is what generosity does. It helps protect my heart from the corruption of greed and want. Guarding against greed will help me protect against the attacks that Satan is wanting to destroy me and the work that God is trying to do to build me up. Another way to think about it is this. Don't ruin today what God has been spending weeks and months and years to build. Guard your heart. Guard against greed. Money and wealth, it's a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil. How we use it will reveal our heart and our character. So what is your wealth? What are your possessions? What is your money? How do you use it, and what does it say about you? When you think about your identity and how you're trying to build your identity, are you relying on your wealth or are you relying on wisdom? Now this, as we continue to kind of move through, because the Proverbs give us a whole lot of insight and wisdom as well on how to acquire wealth. Because it's not good or bad, it's not wrong to gain wealth, but how you gain wealth matters to God. There's a wise way and there's a foolish way. And throughout the Proverbs, we see these two words, these two phrases constantly used, integrity and hard work, as it relates to wisdom in acquiring wealth. Do it with integrity, do it with hard work. Don't look for the quick schemes. And so let me summarize it this way. The third action of wisdom as it relates to my money, what's the wise thing to do? Gain it honestly. Give it generously. Guard against greed. Gain it honestly. Don't steal it. Don't look for get rich quick. Exercise discipline. Save. Be content with what you have. Hold on to your integrity and work hard. That's how you gain wealth with wisdom. Gambling. Get rich quick schemes. The lottery. Dishonest gain. Stealing. Theft. These are the warnings that Proverbs gives us of the fool who gains money. In Proverbs 13:11 says it this way: wealth gained hastily, or wealth gained in a hurry or dishonestly, it will dwindle. Today we'd say that like easy come, easy go. He says, but whoever gathers little by little, they'll increase it. Whoever's disciplined and saves and works hard and collects and gathers little by little. See, what I love about this proverb is it's not just giving us the warning against a quick get-rich-quick scheme. It's not warning us again, don't waste your money on lotto tickets that will probably never pay off. What I love about it is it's saying the person that gains little by little, it's given instruction to not only how to gain wisdom, not only how to gain wealth with wisdom, but how to manage my wealth with wisdom. That the person who gains quickly and will lose it quickly because they never learned how to gain it well. But the person who can gain it with wisdom and responsibility, little by little, they see the value of it, and so they manage it differently. Generally speaking, look at lottery winners and the statistics of their winnings and their life 5 years later. And compared to the average American, lottery winners are, some statistics say, 70% more likely to file bankruptcy. Why? Because they didn't gain it with wisdom, so they didn't know how to manage it with wisdom. They didn't work for it, so they didn't value it. Proverbs 28:6. Better is a poor man who walks in integrity than a rich man who's crooked in his ways. There's another piece of wisdom for us, not only to work hard for it, because when I work for it, I can value it and understand it, and I gain it with wisdom and integrity, but the wisdom given here is that my integrity, my character has greater value than anything I could gain by compromising that integrity. And you may be saying to yourself, but I'm not a thief, Pastor, and I don't steal. My integrity's intact, and it may very well be, but if you're anything like me, you have moments in your life and seasons in your life where your integrity and character come under attack, and how you handle those moments matter. See, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the store, and it must be me or just Satan trying to get at me. But I'll go to the store, and I'll be walking out of the store or in my car or have gotten home and realized that they didn't ring something up correctly. They basically gave it to me for free. It didn't go through the scanner. Or they charged me less than what they should have charged me for the item I got. And in those moments, I'm sure you all do the right thing, but I really struggle in those moments because here's the game I play in my head. Is this my fault? I mean, this is what they get for not doing their job right? Why should I be inconvenienced for them not doing it right? There's a little look into the messed up mind of your pastor. Our kids are mostly out of this season of life, but there was also a time, and sometimes with our youngest still is, but there are some places you can go, and depending on the age of your kid, they can get in free. Or they can get a discounted meal because they're under a certain age. But I had to get really clear with myself at some point, and with the character that I wanted to model for my kids and live out in my own life, that saving a few bucks wasn't worth compromising my integrity. So I don't lie about the age of my kids so that I can get a discount into the pool. I don't lie about my kids' age just so I can save a few bucks. I go back into the store and make sure I pay the correct amount. I'm honest with my taxes, and I pay what I owe. Because when it comes down to it, I'd rather be a few dollars poorer and have a clear conscience and integrity than a bigger bank account, but an untrustworthy character. That's what wisdom in this proverb looks like. To gain it honestly, to not cut corners, but to go out of my way to make sure that how I have what I have is done with integrity and honesty. Because wisdom seeks what has greater value, and it's not monetary. It seeks integrity over dishonesty, hard work over good luck. And before I get to the last action of wisdom in our finances, we have to understand that the Bible's very clear on who this all belongs to. Psalm 24:1 says this: the earth, that thing that we have pictures of from outer space, that blue and white sphere thing that we are standing on right now, the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, or everything in it. The world is his, and everyone who dwells in it. In other words, everything belongs to God. It's not my money. It's not my stuff. It's not my resources. Tell me who it belongs to. The Lord. See, that was my, I know I'm going long, so I know some of you are starting to fall asleep, and that was my test to see how many are actually, so one person's still up. But look, if it's not mine, whose is it? It's the Lord's. All of it is his. He owns it all. And so if everything belongs to God, what's my role for the resources that I have? Stewardship. Stewardship. I am a manager. I've been given management rights to everything that I have. It's not mine, but I've been put in charge to steward it well. That's the fourth action of financial wisdom. Govern it responsibly. Give it generously. Guard against greed. Gain it honestly. Govern it responsibly. I want to hit 3 wisdom principles as it relates to governing our resources responsibly, to taking care of what God has entrusted us with, kind of a catch-all for some key areas we haven't touched on yet. And here's the first one. Debt is not wise. If you want to govern what God has entrusted with you with wisdom, then understand that debt is not wise. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. It's saying don't live in debt because you become a slave to the one you borrow from. And you were set free by the blood of Jesus Christ. You're not a slave to anything. So don't put yourself in slavery to someone else by borrowing from them. See, personally, as it relates to our family, we don't do everything right. We don't even do everything well all the time. But one of the things I thank God for, and I thank my wife for, in her diligence in helping put our budget together and plan things out, is that the only debt we have as a family currently is our mortgage. And that is a massive blessing. It hasn't always been like that, but we got rid of that school debt. We don't take out car loans. We don't spend more than we can afford to pay off every month. The only debt we have is the debt on our home, and we're committed to paying that off. See, stewardship with what God has given us means that I'm not wasting money on high interest rates. It means I'm not handcuffing myself financially to be dependent on someone else's resource and becoming a slave to that organization or person. Governing wealth responsibly means debt is not wise. Here's the next one. It means that contentment matters, or contentment is key. Proverbs 21:17, whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not be rich. I kind of like this one. I'm like, whoever loves oil. So should I cook with butter? If I love wine, so beer instead? I don't, what do you mean? Spending my life, spending my wealth to achieve satisfaction from earthly things is like a dog chasing their tail. I will spend and exhaust all my energy. I will never find what I'm hoping for. And I'll miss out on all the joys of life around me, like a dog chasing his tail. Whoever loves pleasure will be a poor man because they spend their whole life and all of their money pursuing the pleasures, trying to buy satisfaction when satisfaction was meant to not come through stuff, but to come from the one who gave us the stuff. To come from God. It's all his. And I have seen this in my own life, and I've seen it in the lives of others, the futility of chasing after more in hopes that it'll satisfy. Maybe you've run on that hamster wheel once or twice in your life. If I just get more, I'll be happy. If I just get more, I'll be content. It's the problem with greed. More is never enough. Proverbs tells us being a good steward of what God has given us means finding contentment with what we have instead of wasting our lives with worthless pursuits that never satisfy. Here's the last one. To govern wealth and money, resource responsibly, plan and save. Plan and save. Proverbs 13:22, it is good to leave an inheritance to your children's children. See, without wisdom in our finances, without planning, without saving, there's nothing to leave to the next generation. Even some that leave an inheritance to the next generation of wealth fail to leave an inheritance of wisdom to manage that wealth. And personally, for our family, we have a budget. We know where our money's going. We work on that budget. It needs some updating currently, but we have a plan of where our money's going, and we save our money so that we're not overwhelmed when large expenses come. And Lord willing, our stewardship now will allow us to leave an inheritance of wealth for our kids and for their kids, and an inheritance of wisdom for how to manage that wealth. There's a lot of things we can do with the resource that God gives us. There are good things, there are helpful things, there are evil things and wasteful things. It's why God gave us His Word. It's why He gave us some wisdom through the Proverbs to help us see the value and the importance of doing things with wisdom. So what action, what next step of wisdom will you take and begin to practice as it relates to being a manager of what God has entrusted you with? Is there an area of generosity that God is calling you to? Not that you're guilted into, but an opportunity that God is saying, this is worth it. Give towards this. Help here. Are there habits or practices of you looking for shortcuts and cutting corners to try to get more? Where might you need to reevaluate your priority and start guarding against the greed in your heart? Maybe this one, is there one thing you can start doing or one thing you can stop doing that will help you better steward what God has entrusted you with? What's the wise thing to do? And what step will you take to apply wisdom with your wealth this week? To not see wealth as mine. To not see what I have as mine, but to see it as His. And He's entrusted me to take care of it. How are you taking care of that which God has entrusted you with? To do it with wisdom. To do it His way. It will help us navigate the challenges of life as it relates to finances and wealth with greater success and fewer regrets if we'll do it God's way.